Coming up in today's newscast, 11 are killed and 6 injured in a Pittsburgh synagogue shooting attack. Anti-Semitic incidents are reported to have risen over 60% in the past year, and an Israeli film is featured in an Iraqi film fest, yet pulled from the competition. Terror and devastation hit the community of Squirrel Hill in Pittsburgh this weekend as the 46-year-old terrorist and anti-Semite Robert Bowers attacked the Tree of Life Synagogue, killing 11 and injuring at least 6 others. Over 50,000 Jews live in the area, and congregants were celebrating a baby naming ceremony during Saturday morning services when the shooter entered the building.
We got one operator shot at this time.
Third floor, contained in one room. One operator down.
We have eyes on the door. We have one operator hit high in the arm. Like that up to put a gun on it. We have one operator hit high in the arm. We have a tourniquet. Tourniquet. That's all I got right now. Shots were still going off when I came out of the room. I believe he's still alive. All right, be advised, technology is black at this time. We're treating this as a barricaded gunman. We're going to work the problem. How copy? Spontaneous negotiations, ongoing communications efforts to get him to come out, telling him we're not coming in. All right, he's given orders to crawl out. He's not done so yet. All right, be advised, we have a suspect giving us hands and view. We're negotiating a surrender at this time. All units, hold what you got.
This attack is now considered among the deadliest anti-Semitic hate crimes in modern American history, and Bowers eventually surrendered to police and was taken in alive, but not until after killing 10 congregants and a police officer in a shootout. 2 other officers were also shot, and Bowers reportedly declared to police that, quote, all these Jews need to die, end quote. According to reports, Bowers entered the Tree of Life Synagogue with an AR-15 semi-automatic rifle and a Glock pistol. He then mounted his assault on congregants on the first floor and in the basement before being pinned down by SWAT forces, who eventually secured his surrender. FBI officials already stated that they intend to mount a full investigation into how and why Bowers committed this terrible act, but that, quote, at this point we have no knowledge that Bowers was known to law enforcement before today, end quote. That being said, the FBI are treating the attack as a hate crime at this time, charging Bowers with 29 counts of criminal violence and firearms offenses, as well as for violating civil rights laws.
This is the most horrific crime scene I've seen in 22 years with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Members of the Tree of Life Synagogue, conducting a peaceful service in their place of worship, were brutally murdered by a gunman targeting them simply because of their faith.
United States Attorney General Jeff Sessions has also commented that he would likely seek the death penalty in this case. But while the FBI claims not to have known about Bowers before, Bowers isn't new to the world of anti-Semitism. He's a regular, active member of so-called alt-right anti-Semitic and neo-Nazi groups. In fact, just 2 hours before the attack, Bowers tweeted that HIAS, the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, quote, likes to bring invaders in that kill our people. I can't sit by and watch my people get slaughtered. Screw your optics, I'm going in, end quote. Well, the optics aren't bad, they're abhorrent, and the world has responded in kind. President Trump called for the, quote, vile, hate-filled poison of anti-Semitism, end quote, to be condemned and confronted. French President Macron likewise expressed his solidarity in the aftermath of the shooting, and in Tel Aviv, as in other instances of terror around the world, the municipality building at Rabin Square lit up in the colors of the American flag. Further, Israeli Diaspora Affairs Minister Naftali Bennett announced that he'd be visiting the scene of the attack and the funerals of those killed, and Prime Minister Netanyahu reiterated, too, that the entire Israeli people grieve with the families of the dead.
I was heartbroken and appalled by the murderous attack on the Pittsburgh synagogue today. The entire people of Israel grieve with the families of the dead. We stand together with the Jewish community of Pittsburgh. We stand together with the American people in the face of this horrendous anti-Semitic brutality. And we all pray for the speedy recovery of the wounded.
Now, as stated before, Robert Bowers, the Pittsburgh Tree of Life Synagogue shooter, is a longtime anti-Semite who has a recorded history of hatred towards the Jewish community. But unfortunately, this attack is just one in a long line of anti-Semitic hate crimes this year. In fact, according to the ADL and the FBI, anti-Semitic crimes have been surging in recent years, with 2017 alone seeing a 60% spike in the number of reported incidents, the largest single-year rise on record. The Anti-Defamation League tracked nearly 2,000 cases of harassment, vandalism, or physical assaults against Jewish people and institutions in 2017, the highest rate since 1994. whereas in 2016 the number was 1,267, which, by the way, according to statistics, means that anti-Jewish incidents were reported more than all other religiously motivated hate crimes in America combined for that year. In a recent ADL report, the rights group further explains that ahead of the midterm elections, far-right extremist and anti-Semitic harassment against Jews has been ramped up, with over 7.5 million racist tweets being sent out just between August 31st and September 17th. What's worse, nearly 30% of those messages were reportedly posted by automated bots. Just this past month, flyers calling Jews, quote, anti-American were passed out on the UC Davis campus, and an elderly Jewish man in Brooklyn was viciously attacked in the street. Then just last week, an Idaho white supremacist group released a racist robocall targeting Florida gubernatorial candidate Andrew Gillum. In the call, a disgusting and offensive impersonation of Gillum criticizes the Jews as those who owned the slave trade and yet are now, quote, putting Negroes in charge over the white folk, end quote. The ADL struggles to define the causes behind the surge in anti-Semitism, but one thing is sure, Jewish groups nationwide are struggling daily to feel protected. Joining us now via Skype to further discuss the rise in anti-Semitic hate crimes in America is Ambassador Yoram Ettinger, former ambassador in Washington and expert on United States-Israel relations and the Middle East. Ambassador, thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you. My pleasure.
So, first of all, let me start with, the ADL reports that hate crimes began surging during Trump's campaign in 2016, but have continued to rise well into his presidency. What's your initial reaction to that connection?
Well, my realistic assessment, based on my 3-5 annual visits to the U.S. for the last more than 20 years, is that no one should be surprised by anti-Semitism in the U.S., but no one should assume that it reflects more than a very small minority in the United States. Anti-Semitism has been part of what the U.S. is all about since the arrival of the Mayflower back in 1620. However, since 1620 also, Judaism, the Bible especially, the 5 books of Moses have been part and parcel of the American story, socially, ethnically, religiously, culturally, and I think maybe a very good example to that we're talking about the small minority is assessment of what I call the most authentic reflection of the American state of mind, and that is the House of Representatives with 435 representatives who are elected directly by 700,000 voters, constituents in each district. Now, that House of Representatives, along with the Senate, have been the most ardent, systematic, effective ally of the Jewish people and the Jewish state, and that speaks volume.
Ambassador, I would agree with you. First of all, I agree that there is large public support for the Jewish state in Congress and in the Senate in the United States. But at that same time, the ADL numbers speak for themselves. So why do you think, let me rephrase my first question perhaps, why do you think that the anti-Semites, the minority in the United States, feels more emboldened right now under President Trump's administration to behave the way that they've been behaving?
Well, I don't think it has anything to do with President Trump, whose personal record, both his family, his late father, and himself, has always been very, very philo-Jewish, and then philo-Jewish state. Again, it has to do with enclaves, and I would say no more than enclaves, and I'm not trying to minimize the significance of that enclave, of European imported or American imported from Europe type of anti-Semitism, and it has its ups and its downs. But the test of the American society, just like the Israeli society, is not whether there are criminals in our society, The test is the way we deal with those criminals. And it seems to me, and I have no doubt about that, that the way the U.S. has dealt with different forms of anti-Semitism does speak volume of the fact that indeed it is a minority and absolutely does not reflect not only a sense of majority, but it doesn't reflect the administration, it doesn't reflect the legislature, and it doesn't reflect the judiciary in the United States.
All right, Ambassador, thank you so much for taking your time out of your day and speaking with us today. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
In other news, violence along the Gaza-Israel border erupted yet again this weekend, including roughly 16,000 Gazan Palestinians riding along the fence on Friday, followed by terror groups firing roughly 40 rockets into the southern Israeli communities. First, along the Gaza Strip's border fence, IDF forces shot and killed 4 Palestinians and wounded at least 80 others as the weekly Hamas-led March of Return protests continued. The 1,600 Palestinians in the riot threw grenades, homemade explosives, Molotov cocktails, and stones at Israeli troops, while burning tires, setting fires, and otherwise attempting to damage or infiltrate the security barrier. The protests have been ongoing since March 30th, and Israeli Air Force airstrikes in response on Friday targeted 3 Hamas positions in northern Gaza. Then, overnight Friday to Saturday, Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad forces fired nearly 40 rockets aimed at southern Israeli cities. Sirens sounded over a dozen times, but thankfully there were no serious injuries reported. Most rockets fell in open fields, and 2 fell back into the Strip, but the Iron Dome defense system was activated and launched interceptors at least 10 times. Afterwards, Israeli jets again went into the Strip in retaliation, reportedly hitting a whopping 80 terror targets belonging to both Hamas and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad. Then, after suffering Israel's return attack, the Palestinian Islamic Jihad terror group supposedly announced it was accepting an Egyptian-brokered ceasefire effective immediately, and the IDF removed all security restrictions in the area. But with the violence escalating the way it's been, Israeli locals on the border areas feel frozen and have announced intentions not to return their kids to schools anyway. They call on the government to step up its response to the attacks, but only time will tell if their calls will be properly heard. The gruesome 2006 murder of 13-year-old Ta'ir Ghada has never stopped dividing the country of Israel, especially after recent reports revealed a new witness and suspect in addition to the initial speculations against the convictions of Roman Zadorov, who is still sitting in jail for the murder. Well, now there's been yet another update involving new DNA evidence that could spark a retrial for Zadorov, and ILTV correspondent Doriel Mizrahi has a story.
Thanks, Aaron. I can't even believe how crazy this story has become, but let me give you the latest detail on what's happening with this case. In short, a hair that was found on the victim's body has finally been DNA tested, and they found that the hair did not belong to Roman Zadorov, and as a result of this new evidence, Zadorov's lawyer Yaron Alevi is demanding a retrial.
So every time I read more about this case and the new evidence that comes up, I'm more and more confused about Zadorov's conviction, because I know that the bigger sticking points in the case against him centered around his confession, which is questionable, 65 fingerprints that were found at the crime scene, none of which matched Zadorov's, and the murder weapon, which was also never found. Also, as I understand it, Zadorov claimed in his confession to have used a smooth-edged box cutter, where forensics pointed to a serrated blade. So there are a lot of inconsistencies and questions. But back to the hair, the new evidence. Do investigators know whose hair it was?
Yes. Get this, since the very beginning, there was a woman her name cannot be revealed because of court order, but she's been named Aleph Kuf, and she is believed to be the real murderer. It is also known that she suffers from a mental illness, and in fact, a third witness has now said that Aleph Kuf confessed to her that she committed the murder, but it's not her hair. The Abu Kabir Forensic Institute announced Thursday that the hair matched that of Aleph Kuf's former boyfriend.
What did the ex-boyfriend comment? And is this shifting who investigators believe may be the true culprit?
He did not comment yet about this new evidence that links him to the murder, but in the past he did confess that Aleph Kuf carried out the murder while wearing his clothes, so this proves that he was very possibly telling the truth. He also reported to the police that his ex-girlfriend murdered Ta'ir Ghada 6 years after the murder took place, and he took 3 polygraph tests that supported his claims. But the Supreme Court judges who examined his testimony at the time didn't accept it.
All right, so what happens now then?
So Zadorov's lawyer plans to file a request for retrial in the coming months due to this new evidence that further ties Aleph Kuf to the murder. And not only is this new DNA evidence, but also new testimonies from 3 people who Aleph Kuf allegedly confessed the murder to. So there are several documents now, including Aleph Kuf's own testimony that she gave to police that implies her possible involvement in the case, as well as a report from Aleph Kuf's psychiatrist who treated her back in 2014. And in the report, the psychiatrist claims that Aleph Kuf was hungry to kill someone.
Wow. All right. So again, why is this evidence only showing up 12 years later?
That's a great question. These hairs were taken from the scene back in 2006 and were not linked to Zadorov or Aleph Kuf. But in this past year, Zadorov's legal team asked for the hairs to be checked again, finding that they were in fact linked to Aleph Kuf's ex-boyfriend. So with that, Zadorov's lawyer now believes there's enough evidence to demand a retrial, and I for one hope that one is held, because regardless of how this goes, Teirada and her family deserve justice.
All right, well, you're definitely right there. So for justice's sake, I too hope that this case is looked over very closely, and as many times as it takes, to be sure. In the meantime, thank you for your report, Dorian.
Thanks, Aaron.
In an incredibly historic moment this past Friday, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu made a secret visit to Oman, a Muslim Arab Gulf state which has no formal diplomatic ties with Israel. The visit was kept secret until after Netanyahu returned back to Israel Friday afternoon, and this visit to Oman is the first by an Israeli leader in over the last 2 decades. Omani Sultan Qaboos bin Said Al Said extended an invitation to Netanyahu and his wife Sarah, and after lengthy contacts between the 2 countries, the couple came for a visit accompanied by the Mossad chief and his national security advisor. After returning home, the 2 countries released a joint statement which said that the 2 leaders discussed, quote, ways to advance the peace process in the Middle East, as well as several matters of joint interest regarding the achievement of peace and stability in the Middle East, end quote. Then, later on Friday at the Bahrain Security Summit, Omani Foreign Minister Yusuf bin Alawi bin Abdullah said that Israel should be treated the same as other regional states.
أن إسرائيل دولة من دول المنطقة ونحن جميعا ندرك هذا ونعرف هذا والعالم يدرك هذا ويعرف هذا ولكن على الرغم من هذا إسرائيل لا تتعامل في جوارها أو في هذه المنطقة اللي هي منها بنفس الطريقة التي تتعامل الدول الأخرى. ربما حان الوقت الآن أن يكون لإسرائيل ما للدول الأخرى وأن يكون عليها ما على الدول الأخرى.
He added that the road for peace is not an easy one paved with flowers, but Oman's priority is to put an end to the conflict and to move to a new, more peaceful world. Bin Alawi also then offered to assist in Israel-Palestinian peace talks, and while Oman would not serve as a mediator, it would offer ideas for negotiations while expressing support for peace efforts led by the United States. Saudi Arabia and Bahrain then responded, showing support for Oman's initiative and the U.S.-led peace efforts as a whole as well. Perhaps with all these powers finally aligning, a Middle East peace can finally actually be achieved. Despite international boycott initiatives and general hostility aimed at the Jewish state, for the first time ever, an Israeli film has actually shown in an Arab country's film festival. And ILTV's Yael Shir has a report.
Thanks, Aaron. Yeah, this is amazing news. For the first time in history, an Israeli film was showcased at an Iraqi film festival. Now, what makes this so unique is that Iraq doesn't even recognize Israel's right to exist, and the 2 countries don't have diplomatic relations at all. In fact, Iraq observes the Arab League's boycott of Israel, which banned many films simply because they were produced in Israel. However, for this festival, they decided to put their artistic integrity first, and they chose films that showcase high artistic value. And this was one of the selected films, so it's really a very notable situation.
All right, so what can you tell us about the film that made the cut then?
So the film is called The Dive. It's the debut feature of the director Yona Rosenkiel, and it chronicles 3 brothers who overcome their differences as they deal with their father's troubling legacy and as they attempt to carry out his very last wishes during a war. The film has won awards at Jerusalem International Film Festival over the summer for Best Israeli Feature, Best Cinematography, and Best Actor, and it also won awards at several festivals around the world, including the Locarno Film Festival.
Wow, but what can you tell us about this particular festival then? Why did they suddenly allow an Israeli film Yeah, and go ahead, take it away.
So a great question. So the Duhok International Film Festival is taking place in the Kurdish region of northern Iraq. And the founders have said their goal is to build a bridge between Kurdish film production and worldwide filmmaking, while at the same time they want to create an atmosphere of exchange between different cultures.
So they were willing to include an Israeli film in their lineup for that purpose then?
Exactly. But what makes this a bit complex is the relationship between Israel and the Iraqi Kurds. So Iraqi Kurdistan is an autonomous region, yet the Iraqi constitution says that Kurdistan is an entity of Iraq. Back in 2016, the Israeli ambassador to the U.S., Ron Dermer, said that Israel supports Kurdish independence. And that year, hundreds of Kurds attended the memorial service of Israeli President Shimon Peres, who also paid respects to the Kurdish people and supported their independence wholeheartedly. So in May of this past year, several Israeli government officials debated how Israel could contribute to the Kurdish people by developing an independent state in Syria, Iraq, and Turkey. And Likud member Yoav Kish said that if Israel could strengthen the Kurds and if it could lead to the establishment of an independent Kurdish state which supports Israel, we would have an ally in the Middle East.
And then things have been heading in the right direction then, in terms of Kurdish-Israeli relations.
Exactly. However, there have been some obstacles. So last year, the Iraqi Kurds tried to become independent from Iraq. The president of the Kurdistan Regional Government announced that although they had won the vote, Iraq did not accept their independence. And then, after this, the foreign relations head of the Kurdish Regional Government countered reports that the Kurds had even asked for help from Israel to become independent. They denied all reports that a delegation visited Israel to discuss their cooperation.
So then it sounds like the situation continues to be shady. It's not really moving in the right direction at all.
Yes, and the situation was reflected in the festival yesterday when all of a sudden the film was withdrawn from the World Film Competition due to political pressure, despite being showcased at the festival. So basically, the film festival is symbolic of the complex relationship between Israel and the Iraqi Kurds.
All right, well, in any case, The Dive sounds like an intriguing film, and hopefully the success of this film at other festivals around the world will give it the support and acknowledgement that it deserves. Yael, until then, thanks for your report.
Thanks, Aaron.
Moving on now, there's been a lot of public diplomacy recently between Israel and her Arab and or Muslim neighbors, not the least of which took place this weekend in Abu Dhabi. 3 Israeli judokas competing for the first time in the United Arab Emirates under the Israeli national flag all took home bronze medals in their weight classes. Gili Cohen, Baruch Shmailov, and Timna Nelson-Levy all took 3rd place at the Abu Dhabi Judo Grand Slam, with Geffen Primo, another teammate, finishing 5th. The tournament continues until Tuesday, and Israel's total judo delegation includes 6 male and 5 female competitors. Culture and Sports Minister Miri Regev was also in attendance at the competition, making her the first Israeli minister to visit the UAE in any official capacity. But more important than who won or attended is how Israel was represented. Last year at the Grand Slam, the organizers of the competition refused to allow Israeli athletes to compete under their flag or Israeli symbols, instead forcing the Israeli delegation to fight under the banner of the International Judo Federation. When judokas Gili Cohen and Tal Flicker went up to the podium to receive their awards, the IJF anthem and flag were presented. Gold medalist Flicker sang the Israeli anthem Hatikva under his breath. But in response to that incident, the International Judo Federation suspended the Abu Dhabi Grand Slam from its schedule, opting only to reinstate the Grand Slam last month when the UAE promised not to display discriminatory practices again. Well, the United Arab Emirates was true to its word, and it looks like Israel is having a blast at the competition, right alongside the athletes from 62 other participating countries. And now for our Hebrew word of the day. The United Arab Emirates has welcomed Israeli athletes to this year's Judo Grand Slam competition after apologizing for their mistreatment of Israel last year. Well, just to emphasize that it's never too late to apologize then, today's Hebrew word is hitnatzlut, meaning apology. Now, if you're sorry for something you did or you hurt someone's feelings, even accidentally, it's important to apologize, or hitnatzel. And just like in English, where one says, I owe you an apology or you deserve an apology, in Hebrew, one might say, megi'a lecha hitnatzlut. And so remember, consciously or unconsciously, we all need to be aware that what we do affects others. And sometimes an apology or hitnatzlut becomes the only way to move forwards. And with that, let's go ahead and take a look at the weather forecast. Tonight should be clear to partly cloudy and pleasant with a low of 65 or 18 degrees Celsius. Then tomorrow you can expect sunny skies and a slight rise in temperatures to a high of about 84 or 29 degrees Celsius. All right, that's it for today's news. Today's exchange rate is 3.70 shekels to the American dollar. Remember to sign up for our daily newsletter at iltv.tv, and don't forget to follow us on Facebook at Israel English News and on Twitter at ILTV News. I'm Aaron Porras. Thank you for watching.